I was kidnapped by a maniac, but I managed to escape. Hi. I never thought something like this could happen to me, and even now, as I write these words, my hands are shaking. I want to share my story. Maybe it'll serve as a warning for others, or at least help me process this nightmare. I'm 27 years old, and I live alone in a small apartment in the suburbs. Usually, I get home from work around 7 p.m., but that day I stayed late. It was the end of the week, and my coworkers invited me out for drinks. I agreed but left earlier than everyone else because I had to wake up early the next day. When I left the bar, it was around 11 p.m. The streets were almost empty, and I started to feel uneasy. My car was parked on a nearby street, in a dark spot I usually avoided, but there hadn't been any other parking spaces that evening. I quickened my pace, pulled my keys out of my bag, and was almost at my car when I felt someone grab my shoulder. It all happened so fast that I didn't even have time to scream. A stranger covered my mouth with a piece of cloth, and the next thing I knew, everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I was lying on a cold floor. The room was dark, smelled damp, and I could hear the faint sound of water dripping somewhere. My hands were tied behind my back, and there was a gag in my mouth. I tried to move, but the ropes were too tight. My heart was pounding as I tried to piece together what had happened, but everything was a blur. Suddenly, the door opened. A beam of light hit my face, and I saw the silhouette of a man. He was average height, with rough features and short dark hair. He stood there silently, staring at me with an eerie calmness that sent chills down my spine. He didn't say a word. He just stood there watching me. Then he left and locked the door behind him. I started to panic. The only thought in my head was, how do I get out of here? I knew screaming was useless. No one would hear me. The only thing I could do was try to free myself. I began wriggling my hands, trying to loosen the ropes. The skin on my wrists was already raw, but I couldn't stop. After what felt like hours, I heard his footsteps outside the door. He was coming back. This time, he brought food and a bottle of water. He removed the gag and started talking. His voice was low but calm, as if everything happening was completely normal. He told me how long he'd been watching me, how he'd chosen the perfect moment to take me. He said I should be grateful that he was saving me from my boring life. I avoided looking him in the eyes, trying not to provoke him. But inside, I was boiling with rage. I knew that if I showed even a hint of fear, he'd feel like he had power over me. On the third day, I noticed that the lock on the door was old and didn't close properly. When he left the room, I listened carefully to the sound it made. I knew this was my only chance. That evening after he left, I started working on the lock. I had no tools and no experience, but desperation gave me strength. I found a small metal hairpin in the pocket of my jeans. Apparently, he hadn't searched me thoroughly. It was my only hope. The hours dragged on like an eternity, but finally, I heard a click. The door opened. I knew he could return at any moment, so I didn't waste a second. I ran out of the house, but it wasn't a house. It was some abandoned warehouse in an industrial area. It was dark, but I saw lights in the distance. I ran, not daring to look back. When I reached the first car on the road, I practically collapsed onto the hood, begging the driver for help. It was a couple, and they immediately called the police. Later, I found out that my kidnapper was a serial criminal. He was already wanted for similar cases, but he chose me because he thought I'd be an easy target. Now I'm in therapy, and life is slowly getting back to normal. I've moved to a new city, changed my phone number, and I never go out alone at night anymore. I don't know how I managed to survive, but this experience taught me one thing: never lose hope and fight until the very end.